Hello and most welcome to 1024 of our Heidegger series. We are presently once more in the Trädgårdsförening. It's been a while now. We'll have plenty of rain coming, typical June weather. Clement though, about 18-19, so it's pretty average. We cannot complain. The flowers around here are just simply astonishing. Look at this. I don't even know what they're called, but they are precious and amazing. And over here we can see a little pond, maybe, I don't know. It's like being in the tropics. The rhododendron, the gardenia, it's loads of things. We're just missing out on the begonia, the bougainvillea. I really would like to see bougainvillea, but I think it's a bit early though. We've had very interesting chats about Heidegger and how this sort of limiting of the voice of the friend, and the limiting is coming up because I think very aptly put by Ian McGilchrist that we have a sort of first understanding, and that is rather equivalent to the idea of the Husserlian projection. You have a not clear picture, but you clearly project, and this is something you are doing intently, and by doing that you get something in reward. But here is very important to wait. Now is the passive process. By doing it too fast, by trying to grasp it, you will lose it. You need to let, so to speak, the meeting between the endogenous complexity that you actively sent out meet the exogenous complexity, the one you're sending out to. Like all perception, it's first a very active process. 3 times as many neurons are going out to the eye, the ear, the sensory organs. But then, in the actual meet, when the difference comes up, nota bene, not sameness, in the development of the difference, it's very important to let the difference solely emerge to be what it is, not forcing it to be something, not putting it into a mold. Ian McGilchrist firstly explains that as being the left hemisphere intercepting the experience process, stopping it effectively, trying to capture it and dissolving it, making it a static, a sameness. Here we go from repetition to iteration, or we should go from repetition to iteration, but it stops at repetition. And by this preemptive autoimmune attack, so to speak, perception disappears. This is very similar to the easy observable tendency, especially among young people here in Sweden, to ask too many questions. The questions shut off understanding. They are a preemptive take. I mentioned the other day this video exchange between Tony Chimero and an interviewer, how he tried really to explain this is something to understand, not to take and argue with. And arguing, having an argument, taking the opponent, so to speak, his view into a smaller box and negating it. This is this putting into a smaller box that also questioned us. When I ask a question, I diminish the complexity in what is being explained to me. I take that away. It's very similar to the question, have you stopped beating your wife? Can you see there is already a limitation going on here? Most questions are like that, and this is shutting off knowledge, not wanting to understand, and doing something easy and repeatable instead of actively having an open ear to the surroundings, taking it in, having an interest, a want, a need, a delight. Be marveled, like in this beautiful garden. Be marveled by the things. Don't reduce it to simple questions, put almost aggressively. Interrupting the thought train. Fragmenting, making understanding smaller. Today's lecture is named Everything Remains the Same, but Still Completely Different. And this is about the iteration process and its counterintuitive properties. Nothing changes when there is a scale indifferent move from one level of the complexity to next. Think about the fern. Nothing changes. It's an iteration. Well, almost. If we just look at the surface, if we are in that mode of negating an argument or making what someone tried to explain into an argument only, a thesis, a proposition, or making a question, thereby possibly in some way limiting that which is open. And this is, if you just look at the surface, absolutely everything is the same. No difference whatsoever. And this is the magic of iterations. If you have a crude take, they look absolutely the same. Well, maybe from almost any take they can look the same. But from within, they are completely different. Much more different than they would have been able to be different if they were only different from an observable point of view. The inner difference is much more radical. It's actually much more difference because they take sameness on the outer shield as a leverage point to make difference even more strong. We mentioned that many times before. For there to be difference, there have to be sameness. For there to be sameness, there have to be difference. This is the same as the flux of the moment. We discussed that earlier with Henri Bergson and Edmund Husserl. But there is a scale indifference in a way. And that indifference is to difference in self. Indifferent to the before constituted difference. The difference of the question or the difference of the argument. No, this is a more or less divided difference. Doesn't divide itself into difference and sameness. You could actually see this as different wheels turning and turning, and since there are more wheels than only 3, like the 3 perpendicular directions, although 3 directions could be absolutely the same, there is still an acute and evident difference on yet another direction, also that being perpendicular to the others, the fractal dimension if you want. And you can easily see this makes for much more possibilities, this openness in the system. It's an openness in the system. And nothing is yet decided, and this is the listening in that Ian McGilchrist mentioned in this conversation he had. Listening in carefully, not judging preemptively, not being too biased, not being too subjective here. And not being too subjective is allowing for subjectivity, allowing for your direction of your projection to be true to yourself. A subjectivity could actually be that you don't let your own individual shine through, your personality, your wants, your desires, and your needs to come fully through and be alive. That is a sort of an objectivity on the inner side, not deciding what part of the subjectivity that should be or should not be. I think that is something that got too simplified within Schopenhauer. He decided to be objective as he thought on the outside, but astonishingly emotional, subjective, and delimiting on the inside, by saying a little bit like the self is the bad thing. That's a simplified take, and this was done in connection to Eastern thought that influenced him. What have you heard about it? Or what was, to be more correct, possible from his point of view, his limited focal setting? A wish for objectivity that is at the very end, and even more extreme subjectivity and limiting, an even stronger bias. And that would reduce out the fourth and the fifth wheel of this system, where 3 wheels sort of remains the same, but a 4th wheel is turning, and from the outside it seems that nothing is happening. And this is exactly the working of the fern, of the Umbunke. This is how it works. It remains the same, but on a fourth or a fifth or a sixth wheel it keeps turning, and therefore the three first ones make up the stability that makes even greater turning possible. How could a gearbox work if not the cogs were absolutely stable and fixed? It's the fixation, the grounding, the foundation itself. Having a very clear foundation that is absolutely determined, non-movable. It is clear. That's the only chance to have flexibility, because then you can have an openness on the other wheels. And in fractality, in deconstruction, in destruction, we use a Heideggerian term, the opportunities or the possibilities for turning wheels being different are immense. They don't stop short of anything. They are unlimited. This foundational, it's Geschichte, but it's also what you yourself decide to be your firm foundation. This is your chosen X, Y, Z axis, not something ontic. This is voluntarily, and this shows this freeness, this openness that could be reduced to as being intention, but is actually much more. It's much more energetic. It has much more direction than is possible just from intention. This is a stronger intention. Determination. So you see here why repetition at a certain level also comes into the picture. Repetition that is meticulous, very ordered, sequential, the same at the same hour. Repeat the morning process, wash your face, do it in one singular sequence, always repeatable. That will be a foundation for your everyday life. Be sloppy about that, and less difference, creativity and stability will be achieved. Of course, from a certain perspective, it will feel like you're going back into classical physics or the boredom of Das Man, the uniformity, the conformity. But it's establishing the free axis in a voluntary mood, because you decide to do these things. In the end, it is your free will that wants to do this. And this builds the openness on the other four, fifth, and sixth perpendicular directions of the fractality, and that of course make a much more complex meeting point possible, and an even greater openness to what could be. So sameness, as we've been putting down for a while, can in this new take be something prosperous, foundation, a sort of a flower bed to put your seeds in. This is the freedom you will get when it's no longer ontic, when it's ontological, and the question why could be put. Now you're no longer handling beings, but being with a big B. Sein. And now it's possibility for Dasein. Now it is the voice of the friend that can speak loud and clear and doesn't need to be affected on the three first wheels the free thirst perpendicular axis X, Y, Z, or what you prefer, you can without a doubt establish a here and a now, but use that as a starting point. And that determination, that decision, that foundation, that putting the things into the ground will be the starting point for much more flexibility, openness and possibilities. Now you see here, stability, repetition is oddly enough coupled, could be the parents of iteration and difference. And this is of course connected, the next paragraph. We cannot ourselves beforehand decide what is difference, what constitutes a difference. This is the limitation we need to look into. If we beforehand sort of decides what is difference, this is what I call difference. I look around here and I say, that is different to this one, because this has flowers and has light green leaves and this hasn't. See, in telling difference there is a prejudice inborn that needs to be loosened up, and that can only be done through the body, because in a way the body is the starting point here. Your true incarnation, your embodiment, takes a decisive part here just by being the foundation. And maybe one of the hardest clues or things to understand with Derrida and Heidegger is, don't make a preemptive concept of what is different, what is difference. Then you end up in the precarious situation of Saussure and Lévi-Strauss. I think especially like Lévi-Strauss here, the Swiss anthropologist, or was he Alsatian? I forgot. Same language area anyway, but Alsatian he was, I think. He decided preemptively what was difference in different primitive cultures, and that's a problematic in itself. That is a determination that is before the fact. It's not letting things sort of come into life on their own accord, and this is something that Derrida is showing with the sign and the signifier, the signified. It is problematic, and it leads in some cases, if you are too stern, into centrism. Doesn't have to, not even the case when you lead Lévi-Strauss or Saussure. You need to be centric. Deconstruction is a liberator, both of the author and the reader at the very same time. And this goes for other aspects of reality. When we loosen up what is difference, this is the key to permanence and a welcoming to the weird nature of the world of difference. And the smaller the change, the bigger the change can be. That is one of the oddities of scale indifference. And that is indeed the wondrous nature of the real exogenous world, or the meeting with the exogenous world. Yes, it's true that we have expectations beforehand, what constitutes change. Our bias do not make the real world change. It is the bias that could shield us from understanding the depth of difference. But even if we block out our understanding of difference with a question, with giving a face to the voice, flesh out the voice, telling it is plurality, excluding singularity, and thereby making plurality hard to get. I mentioned that earlier, and then I had an example with the singularity. Singularity can only speak if there is an openness. It's a pointing. We can shield us from understanding the depth of difference, but that will not make the difference disappear. Whatever we do, we don't take away the real world. Even if we turn our back on it, it's a dual action constantly. So even if you turn your back on it, you are in on the game. And that could be one of the hardest things to understand. It could be the second leg of the understanding of Entwurft, that you always already been in the world. Really hard to get down to. It's still twisting and turning the wheels of reality, and it's doing its job whether we like it or not, whether we want or not. The world is still happening. You can't make it stop. The stopping in itself, it's a repetition of lower quality. Will give you a bad return, but that doesn't mean that the world is stopped and has become static in the 3 dimensions, for instance. This has a concomitant effect, or concomitant effects. There will be a mutual effectuation. It's still the endogenous meeting the exogenous, whatever you do. Sameness in repetition make for greater possibility for change and creativity. That was also the message of Edward de Bono, who showed that discipline is apt to be done without when coming to making creativity work, to make it work for you, to make it happen. And this discipline makes absolute openness for a second open, just as you had to be careful when you tell a joke. Otherwise, the point, the breaking point, the laughter point, something that Edward Bono called the 0 point, that cannot come about without careful preparations and being absolutely specific and order. And the stronger you do that, the greater the 0 point. Then we get into the flow and we can project thinking. And that means a clear and iterative thinking process. And you can feel that. All of a sudden, all your life, thinking has been passive. And all of a sudden you feel you can construct things with your thinking. That is coming into the active process. And you will feel that. When you feel that, you're gone to the first step. You can create, so to speak, in your mind. And that is building up the endogenous fractal point of view. Your own hermeneutical part of the horizon that can meet the exogenous horizon. You will feel that. That feeling is that you acquire the skill to construct yourself by a lot of repetition, memorization, iterations, a little bit like the liturgy in the cloisters, repeated carefully, intentionally, presently, being there, really wanted to do it, and then you sort of build up your intention and you get into the prana, the ki, the energy of it. That is the true face of difference. This is the world in making. Our whole cultures had conditioned us to be passive. So active thinking is going to be something absolutely new. And therefore, in the beginning, you will not even notice that you are doing it. But it's very close to putting in real life, in the outside life, putting a needle through, putting a thread through a needle. You feel that you're actually doing something. All of a sudden, thinking is no longer passive. And it's almost like it's strenuous, especially in the beginning. It takes strain, effort, whereas the passive thinking feels effortless, happening by itself. And the more you train the active thinking, the more you can sort of put in more muscles into it. And then you can waste or spend, I would say, more energy in your training. Because this is a training. And this will take hours a day. To be active thinking doesn't come for free. Not willing to train, you will not achieve it. And Heidegger and Derrida will forever close its understanding on you. But the reward is tremendous. In the openness, you will perceive what is spirit, what is soul, and you will see beauty for the very first time. That is not accessible in passive thinking. I think to a great degree, active thinking disappeared in the late Renaissance, all over the culture. And for instance, the painting, the music did not take active participation anymore. You needn't no longer to be trained to see a painting from the 19th century. An impressionist painting doesn't take any skill to see. It speaks for itself. It actually demands passivity. It's still beautiful. I do admire them. But the thing is, being active, you can see more things in even those paintings. But the Renaissance paintings can only speak to someone who's built up their active thinking. Otherwise, the exogenous will not be reached, and those are the 24 or 50 layers of Renaissance painting. It will be flat because you yourself is not trained. People used to be more active and enjoyed it. Today, activation has nothing of reward to give. We think. So you see, the very idea that there is no reward to think will absolutely stop thinking, because it's a strenuous activity. It's odd that people go to the gym, spend loads of thousands of crowns training their bodies, energy, pain, strain, and all that, even injury. But they refuse to train their minds. Why is that? Well, we don't see any gain anymore. We think the world is absolutely passive, and we lost our connections to the very muscles. And it looks also, and I think that's the third reason, the first two being it's too much energy to spend. The second is we think the world is passive. We are in the ontic mood. That's confirmed with all of education, and we say yes to that because then we don't have to strain. And the third, we don't see any reward because we see sameness preemptively. Why should I do anything? The Renaissance painting looks still the same. Well, if you train, if you persist, you will see difference. And trust me, people did not spend the equivalents of a whole house to buy a painting that was just like a picture, or a photo. photorealistic. I don't buy into that. They did not have that much money to spend, not even the richest ones, not even the kings were that rich. They are today, but they weren't in those days. So they did spend that money for a good reason, and they saw something much deeper than just one layer, which is all you get from a photo. And that is all what we get for a modern art gallery today. No one, this is an investigation by Ben Ariely, no one can access that anymore. Why would it? Because the amount of energy to start training is enormous. And since we are pretty convinced because of sameness on the surface, with all the questions that we put that block off understanding, and all the argument we do which put the thing we want to understand into a box, something that we can own or sort of conquer, the limitation is already set in place. And then we feel, we understand to some level, there is nothing here to reach, nothing to be acquired, nothing to go into. It can be no furthering of understanding. This is the end point. The buck stops here. Well, not a chance. Why would reality be preemptively limited? Why would the story of Carl Sagan saying those depressing things of the universe, that human knowledge is limited out on the outside? Who put those limitations? How could they evolve? Well, he never spoke about the genealogy of limitations, how their history were, and how they come into action, and how they could be a part of the universe. Well, just look at the Necker cube and the Klein bottle, Möbius strip, shows those limitations are not in the world itself, can only be in your mind, in your head. I have to put a pause here because it's starting to rain. Ja, ingen fågel som helst, en koltrast.
Ja, precis. Den var mörk.
So, because of the rain, it's strided into the botanical palm house. Not a little green here. Well, it's a question to be asked. Who put those limitations in place? And why can't there be more perpendicular directions than the X, Y, Z? I think both Carl Sagan, Steven Weinberg, and especially Jacques, they never explained the phylogenesis of those limitations, how they become part of the world, and somehow they existed somehow beyond our understanding. They were in a way uncreated, never made, never evolved. They're just there, those limitations. I can see in front of me Carl Sagan saying out clear, well, there cannot be more dimensions than the thing we already have. Those are absolute limitations on reality, and they are always present. odd. Doesn't really explain much. It makes more questions to be answered than we start out with. Unnecessary limitations, so to speak. And of course, in a way, they were all victims of the ontic mode. And the only thing that can sort of propagate the ontic mode is the three things I explained earlier on here. That is that by constantly repeating the questions preemptively, well, first argument, I think that's the best one. Making an argument, trying to understand by contradiction. There's nothing wrong with the contradiction in itself. What is problematic is the limitation a contradiction take for its work. We discussed that when we went into H.H. Clarke, that negation is actually much more complex than sheer positive or the is mode. So there's nothing wrong with contradiction, but it does assume a sort of a metaphorical use of reality. Out of is a sort of a negation, and the out of mood, out of the room, makes the room a bit smaller, whereas the clarification, I go into the room, doesn't make the simplification. It's actually vivid direction. And we need to be aware of this when we do make something of the sort of a negation. But do use it carefully and thinkingly. I think that could be good advice. Definitely Carl Sagan, Jacques or Steven Weinberg didn't do that, and neither did those analytical philosophers who claim there is limitations, unborn, unmade, not part of human nature, outside our consciousness, so to speak. And aren't they wondrous to a great degree? Fantastic in their doing, how adding a couple of dimensions, adding complexities like fractality is an openness, and all of a sudden the limitations of the XYZ becomes a possibility for even more openness. So what used to be a prison is now something much greater. Or to phrase the two yoga trainers in the movie Midnight Express, when they train yoga inside the prison, and they say to themselves, it could be a church, it could be a temple, it could be a sanctuary. Well, one of them doesn't believe it to the end, but they're doing yoga inside there. I think that's almost a synchronicity. That is a limitation can actually turn out to be an openness in the end. I say thank you very much here from the farmhouse. It's even extra sunlight up there. Apparently the sun outside is not enough for some of these plants, even in June. So thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon.